Welcome to part 2, video number 2, limited capacity around time. In the last video, we explored limited capacity around bits of information. So starting to understand how much information can a student consume and process within a remote learning lesson. For this particular unit, we're going to take a deeper dive into the amount of time that a teacher may be engaged with the students and what is really a sufficient amount of time to be engaged in an active or a passive environment with students where they can really stay engaged and process the information being shared. So one of the things that we've heard from a lot of teachers from the spring, whenever they started with remote learning, and even now in the fall that they've started up with another school year, is they're struggling to find a balance between what we call passive instruction and active instruction. Where a lot of teachers are really comfortable is in the area of active instruction. And that shouldn't come as a surprise because active instruction it best resembles what their experience was like in their classrooms. So active instruction is the same of what we would consider synchronous instruction, when they are hosting live sessions with their students. So they are having full-on engagement, interaction, conversation, small groups, they're teaching. Again, it's an environment that they are very comfortable with and one that they probably really thrive on. Again, a big part of the reason a lot of teachers go into teaching is because they love that one-on-one interaction or that whole group engagement with their classes. Where students really start to struggle and where teachers especially start to struggle is with passive engagement. This is not something that they are necessarily used to doing on a regular basis. Passive instruction a lot of times takes the form of what we call asynchronous instruction. So what you're actually engaged in right now, you're watching a recording of me providing information. Where a lot of teachers struggle is that they think of passive instruction or asynchronous as I'm going to hit the record button and I'm just going to simply talk for 30 to 40 minutes. I'm going to do lecture, and then I'm going to stop it and I'm going to post it for the students to watch. What research has taught us is that that actually doesn't work well for most students because, again, it's not engaging. They're not building relevance and they're not being given time to really pause and reflect on the learning. So let's take a look at what research does tell us about amounts of times that students will really stay engaged with instruction, and then connect that into what might a lesson look like for a teacher that is doing a recording. So research has taught us that students younger than 14 can spend 5 to 10 minutes of focused attention on passive learning. I want to draw your attention to the term focused attention. Again, we can have students that look as if they're attentive and look as if they're engaged, but their brains may not actually be processing the information and allowing it to move through to working memory and ultimately to long-term memory. So again, 5 to 10 minutes of focused attention on passive learning. So we're not talking about live sessions where the teacher is calling on them and they're communicating and they're sharing with their peers. This is them sitting and watching a recording. So what does research tell us about students 14 and older, or older than 14? So kind of our high school, upper middle school into high school age group. They may be able to stay focused for 10 to 15 minutes on passive learning. Again, some students will be able to do a little bit more than that, some a little bit less. And the same holds true for our younger students. Again, this is where it's really important for the teacher to regularly survey the family members as well as the students to understand how long are they really staying engaged with some of the recordings that they have, and are the recordings being of benefit to them? And what are things that might be changed within the recordings that would help them to maintain their focus for a little bit longer? Now, I also want to stress that sometimes when you share with a teacher, especially at the secondary grades, that, 10 to 15 minutes will be a focused amount of time. Some of them are going to hyperventilate because they are going to think, how in the world am I supposed to fit what would normally be maybe a 90-minute or 45-minute block of instruction into 10 to 15 minutes? Here is where you want to be very careful and intentional in helping them to understand what we mean by a recording. We are not saying the length of the recording can only be 10 to 15 minutes. What we are saying and what the research has shown is that for focused attention, so that really direct instruction, which is the new information or the review of information that you really need them to capture to be able to do a reflection or to be able to do their assignments following, that really needs to happen within this time frame. So what does that maybe look like? And what are ways that you can help coach teachers through understanding how to really balance that active with passive learning? So the first is holding students' attention. So again, if you know that your recording is going to go beyond that time frame, that's okay. But what the research does say is build in very intentional pauses. Now, these are a little bit different from brain breaks. What we're talking about here is time for students to actually sit and reflect on something that you've maybe just taught or delivered in the instruction. This could also be a pause after you've asked them to read something, or maybe you've posted another video within the recording that you want them to watch and listen to, giving them intentional time to reflect. How this is different from a brain break. A brain break, you are actually releasing their brains from the process of information. You are actually telling them, look away, think about something else for a couple of minutes, or however long you're giving them for a brain break. Two different things, but both are really critical. The brain break would follow maybe a pause or a reflection after that 5 or 10 minutes that you've given the students for active instruction. Another strategy for how to hold students' attention: switch the modality of instruction. Again, this might be something new for your teachers in an asynchronous environment. It is not normal for them to talk to their screens as if they're talking to a classroom full of students, but that's really the best way to help them think about going into an asynchronous recording session. Hopefully you've seen me doing that. I've absolutely had bloopers of tongue-tied, kind of had to pause for a minute to catch my thoughts. I've really tried to model the human element of asynchronous instruction. But that's also what's going to help your students to stay connected with you as a human being, but also as their teacher. For them to feel like, yep, I kind of feel like I'm in a live session. I'm kind of feeling like I would be in my classroom right now. And I'm feeling more comfortable, I'm feeling more relaxed, and I'm feeling like I can truly be successful with the learning. So what we mean when we say switch the modality of instruction, this is even in an asynchronous setting, switching between maybe the lecture, putting in a pause, and then having them read something, putting in a pause for reflection, and then maybe have a discussion. Again, in an asynchronous environment, you'll have teachers go, what do you mean have a discussion? It could be where you just tell them to kind of talk to themselves out loud, or to think about, well, what would you share if you had a partner next to you? Or better yet, if you have a family nearby, go and have a quick discussion with them about what it is that you're learning. Family members do want to be engaged in the learning process, but just like students and just like teachers, they're learning how to do that. This is a great way to coach and engage them in the process by encouraging the students to stop and have that discussion with them. Another is to provide a schedule with paper packets. A lot of you have probably already worked with your teachers on providing schedules for remote learning, like what a day will look like, when their live instruction will be, how to access the recorded sessions. Students that are regularly engaged in the synchronous environment, they have that understanding, hopefully by this point, kind of what the day looks like. But you still need to take into consideration students who may not be joining the live sessions every day. There are a lot of different reasons why they may not be joining. Some may be limited access, others may be schedule, others may be families just aren't quite comfortable with that level of engagement at this point in the school term. So again, providing them with a schedule so they don't feel overwhelmed. Imagine a student opening an asynchronous recorded session that they're about to watch, and they see that the time on it is 1 hour and 20 minutes. Right there, for a lot of them, their anxiety is going to go up. They're going to think, I've got to sit here for 1 hour and 20 minutes and listen to this. This is going to be so much information. I'm never going to be able to do it. I'm never going to be able to stay focused. But by doing it in small chunks, like we just talked about, the students will see, oh, it's a couple of short videos. I can absolutely handle that. And that's hopefully what I've been modeling throughout this entire module, is doing short, concise videos on different topics that are all related. For students with a paper packet, imagine them coming by, picking up their paper packet and having a huge stack. That is the same as seeing a recorded video that's 1 hour and 20 minutes. But maybe if you chunk the information, you have paper clipped chunks, but also that they have a very clear schedule on the front that tells them how to go through the information and how to maybe space out their time. Again, it's a recommendation, but it can serve as a guide for a lot of your students. So in just a minute, we're going to take a look at what a sample schedule for that might look like. But first, let's take a look at the structure of a digital mini lesson. Again, this is purely a recommendation. This comes from Kristen Zimke. She was ahead of her time whenever she started creating all these great resources for digital mini lessons. At the point that she started doing it, it was more of the introduction of virtual learning. But I think now she would even give herself a pat on the back that, wow, I was ahead of my time. But what she's done, it really supports remote learning as well. So as you look at the structure of this digital mini lesson, you'll see she says, start with a greeting. Even if it's a recording, talk to your students, greet them, say hello, give them reminders, maybe tell them how you're feeling that day or some of the things that you've encountered throughout the day that were hiccups, things that you didn't anticipate, or things that are going really well. Spend that limited amount of time for instruction, provide a quick model. This is a really critical piece. Actually showing them what it is that you want them to do outside of the recorded session. Then give them time to actually try it. So again, don't just simply end the video after you've modeled it. Actually tell your teachers to incorporate time, or for you, if you're doing lessons, to stop and say, okay, I'm going to pause here for 2 minutes. I want you to try the next one on your own. In 2 minutes, we'll come back together and we'll talk through that one as well. Give them the intentional 2 minutes. Warn them that it's going to be quiet for the 2 minutes. Then bring them back and again review and use that as a model. This is that reflection time. And then make sure that you let them know what your intention for them to be doing beyond the asynchronous recording. Maybe show it on the screen. Don't always depend on verbal cues in order to register for all students. Some students actually need to be able to see it written on the screen. Some students will actually pause and write it down themselves into an agenda log or whatever they might be using for themselves. Again, this is purely a recommendation, but believe it or not, this actually addresses that 10 to 15 minutes or that 5 to 10 minutes for the younger students, which is really happening right here during the teaching. So again, the lesson can be longer than that, but the teach and show is really where that limited amount of time needs to be applied. With paper packets, here's just a general agenda template. Again, this is one that was created just to kind of give you an idea of how to space out time, but more importantly, how to help the students to process the amount of paper that they may have received. I would venture to say most students are picking up paper packets a week at a time. Depending on high school, they may have been picking up an entire semester at a time, which again can feel really overwhelming, especially if their executive functioning skills, their organization skills are not really high. They may very quickly mix pages up. They're all over the place. Again, consider paper clipping or bunching them with rubber bands, or even using the little sticky notes with the little color tabs out to the side to let them know, like, this is lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3. Again, it takes a little bit of extra time, but we're again thinking about passive instruction, keeping our students highly engaged even when you're not live and with them. This can make all the difference in the world for them. So as we wrap up this particular section on limited capacity with a focus on time, I want you to stop and reflect. How might the information shared in this video help a teacher struggling with finding a balance between passive and active instruction in a remote learning environment? So if you do have that teacher that you're seeing great active instruction during synchronous instruction, but then when you're watching some of their recordings, you're going, ooh, okay, I don't think students are going to stay engaged with this. How can you effectively coach them through that based on the information that we just covered? Think about some of the resources as well as some of the information. When you are done reflecting, I hope you'll take a couple of minutes to go into your coaching action plan template, your guide, to do a couple of reflections on your own. When you're ready, take a break, and then we hope you'll continue on with video number 3.